Hi, good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Terence. I'll be your MC for this session. Welcome back to DIFCON 2024 from your respective parallel sessions, and we hope you are keeping yourself very well. Coming up next, we will host a webinar on publishing in quality journals, strategies for successful outcomes. For your kind information, this webinar is also being live streamed on MMU social media platforms to reach a larger audience. If you just joined the session, kindly fill up your details in the attendance link given in the chat box. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed our great honor this evening to have Ms. Victoria Babbitt, who is the Director of Research and Development in Taylor & Francis. Good evening to you from Malaysia, Ms. Victoria.
Good evening. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
We are very happy to have you too. How are you, Ms. Victoria?
Very well. It's morning and it's a sunny day here in Sweden, so life is good.
Wow, that's great. Ms. Victoria, if you do not mind, please allow me to introduce you to the audience.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce Ms. Victoria to you. Victoria joined Taylor & Francis in 2008 and throughout the past decade has supported researchers as they navigate the rapidly changing publishing landscape. Her work involves engaging with global research communities to build knowledge and capacity related to publishing and editorial activities. Prior to joining Taylor & Francis, Victoria conducted postgraduate research in geography at the University of Washington. So during the webinar later, we will explore open access publishing and discussing strategies that can lead to successful outcomes. And we will also examine how to increase acceptance rates in international journals by understanding the submission process, adhering to journal guidelines, and producing high quality research. So, ladies and gentlemen, just a reminder to you, we'll keep the Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. But throughout the session, if you have any questions, you are feel free to comment in the chat box. So before we start the session, I would just like to remind you once again to mute yourself so that we'll have a very smooth session. So, Ms. Victoria, I think the audience can't wait to hear from you. Over to you, Ms. Victoria. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let me just share my slides. Let me know if you can see these.
Yes, it is perfect from our view.
Oh, perfect. Great. Well, again, hello, everyone, and greetings from a very small island just outside of Stockholm, Sweden. It's summertime here, so everyone disappears from the cities and goes out to their summer houses or out to the countryside somewhere, and I've done the same. So, right, let me just minimize this so I can see my slides. There we go. Wonderful. So over the next hour or so, I will be discussing the publishing process. So how to identify quality journals and how to succeed in your objectives of getting published. So we're going to look at all of the elements of finding a good fit for your research, as well as how to avoid publishing in low quality or predatory journals. We'll then discuss what you need to consider when preparing your manuscript and finish off with how to navigate the peer review process. So it's a lot of information, so let's get started. I'm actually going to begin with a crucial step in the research and publishing process, and that is understanding what you're doing, why, and who you would like to communicate with. Making clear decisions and smart strategies at this point will significantly improve your chances of being published in an international journal. And it all starts with choosing a topic that will be relevant to the international community. So this means keeping up to date with the current literature, what key scholars are working on, and here social media and listservs can help, and attending conferences as much as possible. And when choosing a topic and deciding upon case studies and data sets, it is perfectly fine to work with local or regional examples, but it is important to show why these examples or data might be of interest to an international audience. So you could consider a comparative study or engaging with and developing further a well-established model or theory. The main question you should ask yourself is, who outside of my local community would be interested in this research paper? Another of the challenges authors have, especially those who are just starting out, is communicating their research findings in a manner that is accessible and that is in line with how most researchers in their field present their research. In fact, one of the main reasons articles might be rejected is that peer reviewers and editors determine that it's not a true journal article. So what do they mean by that? It could be that what has been submitted to the journal is more similar to a condensed thesis or a book chapter. So it's covering too many different points. It might be unfocused or lacking the structure of a journal article. Or it's too journalistic, more of an example of public scholarship. Basically, the piece of writing is not a journal research article in terms of either the structure or the language, or it could be a combination of the two. So before you begin investigating possible journal options for your work, it is essential to spend time understanding your current project and the audience you would like to reach. Throughout your career, you will likely be involved in many different types of research, which will ultimately lead you to produce a variety of content. And typically people focus on the research article, but over time you may publish a review article, whether that's a literature or theory review or a systematic review. You might want to publish a position piece or a case study or book review. And there's all sorts of new article types popping up like data notes and this sort of thing. Sometimes your work will be written for specialists in your field, but you may also choose to engage in public scholarship, so writing for the general public. And we saw how important that was during the pandemic, translating research so that the general public understood some of the things that we were seeing. And sometimes your research will be for a local audience, and sometimes you'll hope to reach an international audience. So really what I want to stress here is do take the time to determine what your overall objectives are at the start of your project. Now, it's also important to understand what's expected of you, what the particular requirements are in your current position. So are you required to publish research articles, or is the expectation that you'll write a book and then you'll turn the various chapters into articles in the coming years? Is there the expectation that you'll collaborate with your advisor and be a co-author? And if so, what does that actually mean in practice? Once you've determined your objectives and understand what's required of you, then you can begin considering where to publish. And when you begin investigating appropriate places to publish, remember, you're joining an ongoing conversation in your field. So you want to make sure that you're contributing thoughtfully to that conversation. So identifying potential journals to publish in, especially when you're starting out, can be really challenging. There are many journals out there, new ones popping up every year. So it's really hard to kind of sift through those and figure out which ones are relevant. Now, there are many indexes out there that can help, but I'm going to focus on a couple of the most relevant journal indexes in terms of coverage, and that's the Web of Science and Journals Master List and the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is called the DOAJ. Some people pronounce it as DOAJ. And then I'm going to take a look at a publisher website. These are really great starting points for looking for journals. And I'll show you how you can quickly identify quality journals in your area that might be a good fit and worth exploring further. So let's start with the Web of Science Master Journals list. It's a really good starting place if you're unaware of the key publishers and journals in your research area. The Web of Science has a number of indexes, such as the Social Science Citation Index, the Science Citation Index, and the Emerging Sources Citation Index. And the Web of Science is an index that has strict assessment process for the journals that they include in their databases. There are 24 areas of criteria, including those on this slide. So on this slide, I've highlighted some of the key ones, which is the basic publication information, and I've really emphasized contact details for the journal and the publisher. They want article titles and abstracts in English, but the content itself can be in any language. They want to see a clear peer review policy published on the website. They want to see timeliness of publication, so they don't want to see big gaps between issues or articles. They want to make sure that the scholarly content is relevant to the community it's serving and is of high quality. They want to see a website that is fully functional, so that they have good functionality and that there's going to be the key information there. And some of the information they want to see is about the editorial board. So they want to see the composition of the board, how it's structured, and they want to see affiliation details for everyone that is working on that journal. And for authors, they want to see clear author distribution, and again, they want to see those affiliation details for the authors. Now, the Web of Science also assesses citation activity, and that helps with the inclusion into the different indexes that they serve. So we're going to take a look at the journal's master list, and I'll show you how you can identify potential journals to submit your work to. So let's go here. And can everyone see this, this web page here? The journal's master list. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for confirming. All right. So we're just going to take a look at the journal's master list. One thing I wanted to point out is if you look up in the right-hand corner, upper corner there, you'll see that I'm logged in. But there is some functionality even if you don't have a account with Clarivate. So you'll still be able to kind of see some of the information. I'll show you in just a moment what I mean there. So here, you can type in any topic you want here to search, but I also wanted to highlight the fact that they do have a match manuscript function here so that you can try and match your manuscript with journals that are indexed there. Many publishers have this too, including Taylor and Francis, but it's a nice little function. But here we're going to look under the topic of finance and economics, and we're going to search for journals within this topic area. So here is the results page, and as you see, they've got over 1,000 journals, 1,610 journals that fall under finance and economics. And there's a lot of filters that you can use here. So we've got the different kind of collections that the journal could be included in that you can filter by. You can filter by open access here, so you can click to see if it's linked in the directory of open access journals. I'm not going to do that because we're going to look at the directory of open access journals. And then you can also filter down by category. So some of these subject areas, such as finance or economics, they're huge subject areas. So you might want to pare down to try and find something that is a little bit more relevant. We've got country and region. So if you're interested in looking at journals that are published in a particular country, you can filter by that. The same with language and frequency, and then whether or not it's included in the journal citation reports. And that means that does it have an impact factor or not? So looking at the results here, we're just going to scroll down here and we're going to take a look at cogent economics and finance. So here you already see a lot of information. So you have the publisher address, and I need to note, I discovered this when I was looking, preparing for this session. The address here is our old address in Norway, so it's not relevant, but I'll show you that there's kind of a way of circumventing that so that you can assure yourself that it is published by Taylor and Francis. You have the ISSN number here, and then you have the collection that it's included in. So here it's the Emerging Sources Citation Index. So we're going to just go further and look at the journal page where you're going to see more information. And here you've got some of the general information. What is really great about this is you have direct links to the journal webpage and to the publisher's website page. So even though we need to get this address corrected up here, you still have a direct link to the journal's webpage. So you can be assured that it's published by Taylor and Francis. You can go to that website. You see the first year of publication. You see that it's a continuous publication. It's open access, so it's continuously publishing, and that's why it only has one issue a year. And then it's got information about weeks from submission to publication. So it's about 12 weeks from submission to publication. If you scroll down here, there will be information about the indexes and information about the impact factor. And for some reason, it's not loading for me today. Usually it does. So you would find the impact factor here. And then this is also information on this journal citation indicator, which is a new metric. And then down here, you've got the open access information. So how much the APCs are, if the author holds copyright without restrictions, where it's archived, if it's got a DOAJ seal, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and then all the different subjects. So it's pulling a lot of this information from the DOAJ, and then a little bit about the peer review. So there's a lot of information here that you can pull to assess whether or not the journal is relevant for you. Let me just go back to the presentation here. Then we have the DOAJ, which I've mentioned, and the DOAJ indexes only open access journals. So currently there are over 20,000 journals indexed in the DOAJ, and each journal goes through a rigorous evaluation process before they are included. And here's some of the categories that they examine. As you can see, there are OA-specific categories such as OA policy and licensing terms, but otherwise they're quite similar to the Web of Science. Some of the journals receive a DOAJ seal, which I just mentioned. And this means that they are the gold standard of open access in terms of digital preservation, persistent identifiers, so DOIs, comprehensive metadata submitted to the DOAJ, the license type and information, so they want to see CC licenses, and then they want to see that the authors retain copyright, and they want to see self-archiving policies. So let's just take a quick look at the DOAJ. And I love the DOAJ design. They just redesigned the website last year, and I think it's the prettiest of all the databases out there. So yeah, let's take a look at the DOAJ. As you see, there's a lot of information just on this landing page. They feature journals in over 80 languages, 134 countries represented, over 13,000 journals without APCs. As I mentioned, over 20,000 journals there. So we're going to take a look at subject area. And here I'm going to take a look at social sciences. So it's a very broad subject area. So here, again, you're going to see a lot of filters that you can use. So you can filter by whether the journal has a fee or not, whether it has a DOAJ seal or not, and whether or not the author retains all rights. And then if you go down here, you can specify a little bit more by subject area, similar to the Web of Science. You can choose languages, and here you'll see the diversity of languages that they feature. The majority in English, but they have plenty in Spanish, Portuguese, Indonesian, French, and it goes on and on. You can also filter by licenses, all the different CC licenses, and by publisher, if you'd like. So why don't we just filter by Taylor and Francis? And then publisher country, and then you can also filter by different types of peer review, and then by date added. So here, let's just take a look at another Cogent title. So this is Cogent Social Sciences. And you can see, again, there's a lot of information just on this main page. So you see a direct link to the website. You see the APC costs there. You see that authors retain all rights. And then you see what kind of license that they use. But clicking through, you'll see a little bit more information. Again, links to the journal website and to the ISSN portal. And then they've just broken out the information a little bit more. So you've got the journal charges for APCs. You have when it started publishing open access and the type of license they use, who the publisher is, and a link to the publisher website. And then I really like this functionality here. They've got direct links to the aims and scope, instructions for authors, editorial board, etc. So you can directly check on those. Information about the copyright, and here they have the expectation of publication from submission, which is 12 weeks for this journal, and also where it is digitally archived and where their policy is archived, and the type of persistent identifier they use. So again, plenty of information. You've got some of the keywords there. So really great source for when you're searching for journals. So once you've identified some of the journals that you think would be a good fit for your work, you need to investigate further to make sure the journals that you're choosing are truly high quality journals. Now, unfortunately, in recent years, predatory publishers have managed to get their journals indexed in respected databases. So it's really always a good idea to cross-check and make sure that the journal possesses all of the characteristics of a quality publication. And your first stop should be the journal website. So let's take a quick tour of our website so that you can see the type of information available. And again, we're using our website, but most major publishers will be featuring similar information on their websites. So here's the landing page for Taylor and Francis. It's pretty easy to use. You can search by keywords there, or you can scroll down here and search under these different topics. But here we're going to take a look at some journals under business and management. Let me see. There we go. Business management and accounting. So this is going to give us a search results page. And as you see, it's kind of broken up into 3 different areas: articles, journals. So there's 196 journals that fall under that area, and then special issues and collections as well. But we're interested in journals, so we're going to click over there. And as you can see, there are quite a few journals here to look through. But I'm interested in looking for one particular journal, and hopefully I can find it quickly. I think I can, and that is Cogent Business and Management. So again, this is another open access journal, and we're going to click there, and I'm just going to show you the type of information that we can find on the website. So it's an open access journal. All the content is published as it comes in. So you have latest, you have most read, most cited, and trending content. But we're interested in looking at the information about Cogent, about the journal here. So as we look down, we're looking at different issues. I'm looking for the aims and scope statement, and I'm actually not finding the aims and scope statement here, which is a little bit funny. Sorry about that. I'm not finding the aims and scope statement on this one. I'm not sure if there's something wrong with my site today. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to show you another site. Apologies for that. Let us look at yep, this one is not showing the aims. I'm terribly sorry. I'm going back here and I'm looking at this and not finding any of the. Let's look at this one. See if we have. I think they've just done a redesign, and we're going to need to take a look at this. Okay. Apologies for that. I think we're having a little bit of a fluke with our website today. So I'm just going to skip over that for the time being. My sincere apologies there. So basically on the journal website, the information that you want to see is you want to be able to see the published articles, which we're able to see. We want to see the editorial board. We want to see who is a member on that editorial board, what the research is, if it's relevant. We want to see society affiliations, if that is relevant for that journal. There should be information on indexing. So, for instance, yesterday when I looked at this journal, the indexing information showed that this journal in particular, Cogent Business and Management, had an impact factor of 3. There should be information about the instructions for authors, which we're going to look at momentarily. There should be editorial policies on every single journal website. So you want to make sure that journals are featuring policies on how they assess papers and what the rules of publishing are, essentially. So they're going to have all those kind of editorial policies there. Right. I'm going to move on. So before I move on, I wanted to briefly discuss predatory publishing. Many, if not all of you, will be aware of predatory publishers. These entities present themselves as legitimate publishers, editors, and journals, and they seek to exploit legitimate open access publishing model and have become quite sophisticated in their methods. It can be very easy to mistake a predatory journal for a legitimate one. So it's important to really research a journal, especially if you are contacted by a journal out of the blue, asking you to submit an article. Predatory publishers will flood your email inboxes with invitations to publish your articles with them. However, often the journal in question will be outside of your research area. So take a look at the slide here. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see an email that I blacked out a little bit of information. And this is actually an email my partner received last year. It's from a medical journal interested in publishing his research, which focuses on financial economics and asset pricing. So one would assume not a great fit for a medical journal. Predatory publishers have many characteristics in common. Their websites contain incorrect or misleading information. So for instance, they will copy established journals, names, and website design, but include some small differences, such as a slight difference in the journal title. The editorial board will feature names of well-established researchers who never agreed to be on the board. They also promise very fast peer review and publishing times, promising publication within a week, for instance. And for those of you that have published before, you know that's quite unrealistic. Crucially, the peer review process often does not happen or it's fabricated. And lastly, they often have confusing or unclear information about publication fees. But a clear definition of predatory publishers can be really difficult for a number of reasons. The main one being that predatory journals tend to change their tactics regularly. In addition, as a recent IAP report states, those definitions fail to distinguish between deceptive or fraudulent journals and journals that are just low-quality outlets that might willingly disregard academic norms but be well-intentioned. And this is the main critique of the so-called black or white lists. The Inter-Academy Partnership Report, they mapped out the spectrum of predatory behaviors, which is a helpful way of thinking about predatory publishing. Researchers should avoid journals that could be considered fraudulent, deceptive, or exhibit unacceptable low quality, because here there's likely intention to exploit authors. But authors should also proceed with caution if the journal is just low quality. While the publisher might not intend to exploit authors, they may not have standard practices in place, such as preservation of articles and indexing of articles, proper production practices, and minimal discoverability of the website, which means few people will find and read the articles that they publish. So as mentioned, the best way to avoid publishing in a predatory journal is to do your research. So check the website, look to see if the journal is indexed. And if you're unfamiliar with the journal or the publisher, remember to double check on the indexing site. If it says it has an impact factor, go to the Web of Science to see if the journal is listed. And if you find the journal with the same name in the Web of Science, click on those links that I showed you that will direct you back to the journal. And make sure that those websites are the same websites. You also want to look at the content. Is it high quality content? Is it understandable with correct grammar and copy editing? And then again, check out the editorial policies. Number one, do they have any? Are they robust and clear and easy to find? And for Taylor and Francis, if you click on our editorial policies on a journal page, it will lead you to the editorial policies that we have for all of our journals. So it's not that each journal has its own editorial policy. All journals should be following the same rules and guidelines. And don't forget your local community, your colleagues and librarians. See if they've heard of the journal or publisher before, or if they have any experience publishing in the journal. And then lastly, use Think, Check, Submit if you're unsure. They've created a great resource. It's a toolkit for investigating journals covering many of the topics that we've discussed today. So they have different questions that you need to be asking yourself when you're looking at a journal website. So I've been tricked. What should I do? This is why it's important that you do your research before submitting to a journal. If you do end up by publishing with a predatory publisher, there are a few things you can try. First of all, try not to be embarrassed. The communications and websites are designed to deceive you into thinking that they are legitimate publishers. And as I said, they become quite sophisticated. Once that you become aware that you've published in a predatory publisher, contact your institution. They may be able to pressure the journal to remove your article. And if the journal doesn't respond, which is quite common, there may be additional legal steps that can be taken. It's important that you do not resubmit your paper to another journal until the situation has been resolved with the predatory journal and your paper has been permanently removed from your website. And if you manage to get your paper removed, you can then submit it to another journal, but you must tell the editor what happened via cover letter so that they can make an informed decision. So you need to let them know that it was originally published by a predatory journal and you managed to get it removed. And as said, people aren't going to judge you for this. The predatory publishers are quite sophisticated, so it just is quite good to be honest. So, okay, back to finding suitable journals for your work. Once you've identified some high quality candidates, you need to do a final check to make sure that your paper will be of interest to the editors. First, you want to take a look at the content to see that they're publishing similar types of articles in terms of the topic, methodologies, and article type, etc. And when you're checking out the editorial board, take time to explore what type of research the editors are involved with. Is it similar or within the same area as yours? And also, when you're exploring the journal website, check to see if there are any calls for papers. There might be one that aligns with the type of work that you're currently engaged with. But the best place to get a sense of whether your work would be of interest is the aims and scope statement on the journal website. So aims and scope statements are designed to give librarians, students, researchers, and potential authors a clear understanding of what the journal is about and the type of research that they are interested in publishing. Here's an example from education, our open access Cogent Education. And as you can see, Cogent Education has a broad scope. So they are a multidisciplinary journal, and they're interested in articles from across the breadth of educational research. They list the different sections of the journal in the aims and scope statement with links to those sections. Each will have a short description of the type of research that they focus on. So for this journal, most researchers in education could probably submit their work to this journal as it has such a broad scope. It's covering all different aspects of the research field. The next journal is African Education Review, and it also has a fairly broad scope, but slightly more focused. So this statement provides some history about the journal before describing the type of research that they would like to publish. And here they're interested in debates on theory, policy, and practice, and welcome research that it is cross, inter, and transdisciplinary. However, they do highlight a few areas of particular interest, such as research on higher education that focuses on issues and challenges facing the different tiers of education on the African continent as well as in the global context. So again, a fairly broad scope, but you would need to investigate further before submitting your work to make sure that it would be a good fit. And then lastly, we have a journal with a smaller scope, the Journal of Education Policy. And I must say, this is one of the most descriptive aims and scope statements I've ever seen. It's really fantastic. So first of all, this journal is interested in a particular type of theoretical research that is focused on policymaking, impact, and implementation. In the second paragraph, they describe what they mean by that. So they break that out a bit. And they even highlight the different types of theoretical frameworks that they're interested in. They then go on to stress the importance of relevance to a global audience, that national case studies must be conceptually or methodologically linked to the global context in some way. And lastly, they speak specifically to the requirements of empirical research. So this journal has a much tighter scope than the previous two. And as you can see, all of these journals have the word education in their titles, but they're interested in publishing very different types of research. So again, it is important that you take the time to carefully read the aims and scope statements before you submit your paper to a journal. And I know that it seems like I'm going on and on about this, but the number one reason articles are rejected is because they were sent to the wrong journal. So it is really important that you take time to do your research ahead of time, because it will slow you down if you're sending your work to the wrong journal. Now, with the aims and scope statements, it's a good idea to take a look at what's been published in the journal in the past, say, 3 to 5 years, and ask yourself, does my research fit in this journal? And if you find research that's similar to yours, you should consider referencing it. Remember, you're joining an ongoing conversation in your field and in that particular journal. Lastly, review the editorial board of the journal. I mentioned this before. This will give you a sense of what type of research they're interested in publishing. Editorial boards are built to reflect the ambitions of the journal. So if they're interested in publishing research in a certain area, they will try to appoint someone to the board that is a specialist in that area, because they can act as an ambassador for the journal and help with peer review, because they're going to know all the key figures in that research area. And the same is true with geography. If a journal is interested in receiving more research from a specific country or region, they will try to appoint someone based there to help increase submissions of articles from institutions in that area. So I would recommend that you choose a few journals that you feel would be a good fit for your work, and create a list and rank them from your number one choice onward. And when it's time to submit, start with your number one choice. And if for some reason that journal is not interested in publishing your work, move on to your number two choice, and so on and so forth until your article is accepted. It's all about having a clear strategy at the start of the process and acting on that strategy. Now, obviously, we don't have time for a full writing workshop today, but I just wanted to go over some basic tips to help you make your argument easy to read and to understand. To gain a good understanding about how to communicate your research, I suggest you read a lot. And you're all researchers, so I'm sure that's how you're spending your time. The absolute best thing you can do to become a great writer is to read other great writers in your field. See how they structure their papers and arguments, how they present their data. And you can take that and you can take it as inspiration and model your paper structure after theirs. I'm not suggesting that you plagiarize. I'm just saying take inspiration from their writing. If at all possible, write your paper first and edit it later. This really will help you create a through line and some flow in your paper. The through line is that line that's going to hold all those different pieces together. And remember, simplicity is key, especially when you are dealing with complex problems and theories. So think about your sentence structure and your use of the passive voice. Sentences should be kept relatively short, otherwise the reader may lose track of your point. You should also think about varying the lengths of your sentences to create a bit of rhythm in your writing. And I encourage you to read your writing out loud just to see how the flow is going. And passive voice sentences are sometimes necessary, such as in a method section where it's common to write "the research was conducted" rather than in an active form where you would say "I conducted the research." However, make sure to mix it up with the active voice if you're using passive voice. The goal here is to make it as easy as possible for the reader to understand your arguments and the evidence you're providing. And the most important strategy for achieving this is to create a clear and easy to follow structure to your paper, which I'm going to cover a bit on the next slide. Now, along with the text, you'll want to ensure that all of your figures and tables are formatted in an accessible style and that your descriptions are clear and truly descriptive. If you're using images, you need to ensure that the image is high quality and meets the requirements of the journal in terms of pixels. Also, if you're using anyone else's images or data, you must obtain permission before you submit to the journal. Increasingly, journals are encouraging authors to make their data available, and many funders now require this as well. This is perhaps true with open access journals and platforms. Now, we don't have time to go into a full discussion about data today, but you will find information about the FAIR principles and journal policies on our website if you're interested. And lastly, I think it's useful to remember your role is that of a storyteller. It's up to you to give life to the exciting story of your research and to translate the passion you have for the subject to the paper in an easy to follow manner. As mentioned, one of the key strategies for communicating your research ideas effectively is to create a strong structure for your paper. And for most papers, this would mean following the IMRAD model shown on the slide here. And many talk about this model as the why, how, what, and so what model. And here's some of the things to focus on. For the introduction, you need to provide the context, the current state of the field, your contributions, and then outline what you intend to do and clearly state the research question. The methods need to be appropriate for the research area. It's important to include details so that the study or experiments can be replicated. And it really must clearly outline the data, how the data were collected. And then lastly, the discussion and conclusion need to explain the findings in a robust manner that engages with the current literature, explores the implications for future research, and does so in a manner that answers the research question posed in the introduction. So it really should be in dialogue with the introduction somewhat. Now, apart from the paper, another important element is the abstract. Like the introduction, the abstract is often the first thing an editor or potential peer reviewer or reader will look at to assess whether an article is of interest. So it is essential that you spend a good deal of time writing and refining your abstracts. And here's some of the basic tips to keep in mind. First of all, it's difficult to write a decent abstract before you actually finish the paper, as the abstract is an overview of the content. You want to make sure to know the parameters for the particular journal that you're submitting to. Most will have word counts and perhaps guidance on format and structure. And the word counts usually around 250 to 300 words for an abstract. And you want to think about who your potential audience is and write it for them, because you might use slightly different language if you're hoping to reach practitioners as opposed to other researchers. Now, after you've written your first draft, go through and remove any unnecessary words. You want to focus on the essential information. And if you end up revising your paper after you've written the abstract, make sure to review and revise the abstract as well, because in those revisions, you may have changed something really key in the paper that needs to be reflected in that abstract. And this is likely to occur during peer review. And lastly, read it out loud and have others read it for fluency. If your abstract is difficult to read, it's unlikely people are going to click through to the article because they're going to assume the article is poorly written as well. Now, prior to submitting your work, it's imperative that you read and follow the instructions for authors. Every journal will have what we call instructions for authors or author guidelines, which you can find on the journal website. These are the rule books for the journal. So under the instructions for authors, you will find information on APC and waivers for open access and any other fees that the journal might charge. For instance, some economics journals have submission fees. So all that information should be clearly stated on the journal website. There will be information about the peer review process for that particular journal, the types of articles they accept, and the word limits for those different articles. There might be reporting guidelines, especially for medical titles, and there will be information about how you should prepare your manuscript. So formatting, heading, reference style, all this type of information. There will also be information about the data sharing policies and any other relevant information about the process, such as similarity checks conducted upon submission, which most of our journals have now. Now, before I get to the peer review process, I'd just like to take a minute to discuss some of the issues we see with publishing ethics. So on the screen are a list, and unfortunately it's not complete, of the issues that we see on a regular basis. So for the first and second row, many problems are often due to lack of full understanding or confusion around standards and policies. So authorship criteria or non-financial conflicts of interest. There can be a lot of confusion around that. So these can have elements of conscious misconduct as well. The third row, however, can only be conscious and very serious misconduct designed around manipulating the publishing process. So today, obviously, we don't have time for a deep dive into publishing ethics. So I'm just going to discuss one topic, and that is authorship. However, we have plenty of resources on our website if you're interested in this topic. So just these information you'll find under the editorial policies that I mentioned earlier. So authorship issues are quite common, and they tend to slow the peer review and production process down. Because when a dispute arises between authors, we as publishers and our editors, we can't really intervene because we weren't a part of the writing process. So when this occurs, we tend to put our hands up and say, you need to resolve this and come back to us. And often the issues have to do with disagreements over who's included on the authorship line, the sequence of names, who's responsible for different parts of the process, etc. So to avoid any problems, if you have co-authors, it's extremely important that you have a written agreement between all of the authors regarding responsibilities, the sequence of names on the authorship line, and what journal you're submitting to. Apart from the standard authorship disputes, here are three distinct issues that we see. The first one is ghost authorship, and this is when a contribution to a manuscript has been made without acknowledgement of that contribution. And this is an issue because we cannot know if there is a conflict of interest. Next, we have guest authorship, and this is when authorship is granted to an individual who does not meet ethical standards for authorship. And that's usually because of his or her seniority or reputation or supposed influence. I just have to apologize right now. We have someone checking our chimney, so I apologize for any noise. Now, guest authorship tends to be quite common in some institutions, but anyone on the authorship line should have made a significant contribution to the paper, as they will be held responsible for it in the future. Lastly, we have authorship for sale, and this is a huge problem right now. There have been a rising number of cases where paper mills offer to add an author's name after the paper has been accepted for publication, but for a price. And these actors are paying on the desperation of authors who are under pressure to publish more and more articles to progress their careers. So who qualifies as an author? So on this slide, we've listed all the areas that each author should have participated with or agreed to. But here are the key aspects to remember. Any listed author is a representative of the published paper and shares accountability. Corresponding authors sign author publishing agreements, so legal agreements on behalf of the co-authors. It's really important that we all remember that authorship comes with responsibilities. Now, I'd like to briefly discuss the use of generative AI and large language models. We often receive questions about how authors can use AI in the writing process. This is a fast-moving space, and the basic rule is that you cannot use AI to create content. That would include using AI to write parts of articles or whole articles or peer review reports. As we just discussed, authorship comes with responsibilities, and thus large language models and other AI tools do not meet the criteria for authorship. You may use AI to clean up language and translate. However, you need to acknowledge any use of AI in your paper. So here are some basic tips to keep in mind prior to submitting. First of all, in most cases, you'll be apologies for that. In most cases, you will be submitting to an online system to make sure that you have all the files on hand you need to submit. So that's figures, tables, and any other data files which may make up your submission. And if you're using images or data that's not yours, make sure that you have obtained permission. This is your responsibility. You also want to make sure to include any necessary documentation, such as disclosure statements or competing interest statements, if they're relevant to your project. And many journals and systems require ORCID IDs. If you do not have one yet, I encourage you to get one. It only takes a couple of minutes to register. So to avoid any problems or mistakes, make sure that you have an agreed upon plan with your co-authors, as I mentioned before, on who is responsible for what and which journals you're submitting to. Also, be certain that you have their correct information. So that's their preferred spelling of their name, email addresses, and their current affiliation. Lastly, make sure that the version you submit is the final version and not an earlier draft. I apologize, I need to pause for just one moment.
Har du basta?
Ja, det vid bryggan. Vi har, och vi är jättenyfiken om det funkar fortfarande.
Okej, vet du om det stereogrejer?
Ja, det steg ligger där.
Det ligger där nere?
Ja, tack.
Det är öppet där nere också.
Okay, tack. Sorry about that. A little bit of Swedish for you there. All right, moving on to peer review. Again, apologies for that brief pause there. I really love this quote. It captures the importance of peer review. Not only is it quality control, but it is a form of collaboration between researchers. And researchers agree that peer review is an essential part of the process. So the chart on this slide is from a dated, but I think significant study that was conducted by Publons. They did this study in 2018, and they were speaking to thousands of researchers. And here you can see that the majority of researchers find peer review either important or extremely important. Peer review is where the papers are assessed for the different elements that we've discussed so far today. So is the article a good fit? Is it following our guidelines? Does the evidence support the findings? Is it well written? Are there any ethical issues, etc.? So within the increase of manuscripts submitted annually, the diverse areas of research, and the global nature of the academic community, it is unrealistic to think that an editor could make these decisions on their own. They will not have the experience in all of the subject areas and the emergent fields of study. So they need to depend on external experts who can evaluate the content. And peer review helps to improve research and communication of the findings through recommendations. And as highlighted on this slide, peer review is, in a sense, a collaboration with the broader community designed to help you publish your very best work. And lastly, peer review validates research. The editors and peer reviewers, when accepting a paper, are giving it a stamp of approval, confirming that it is sound science. So let's take a look at what peer review looks like in practice. So there are three types of peer review you're likely to come across. The first is called single anonymous, and this is when the peer reviewer knows the identity of the author, but the author does not know the identity of the peer reviewer. And this tends to be the most common type within science, technology, and medical disciplines. The second type, double anonymous peer review, is when all identities are hidden. And this is the most common within arts and humanities and social sciences. However, it is fairly easy to discern the identity of an author if they presented their work previously or if they're citing themselves extensively. So if the journal has double anonymous peer review, it's important that you anonymize your paper before you submit it. So if you're citing yourself, you can replace your name with author, and you can look at your acknowledgements and make sure that there's nothing there that identifies you as well. Lastly, there's open peer review, where all identities are known. And keep in mind, there are many varieties of open peer review, from the basic, where everyone's identity is known, to a completely open process where the public can see the submitted version of the article, all of the peer reviewer and author's comments, and the different versions of the paper. So before you submit, make sure to review those instructions for authors to make sure that you're aware of the type of peer review that the journal conducts, just so that you're not surprised during the process. So let's take a look at the peer review process and the most common types of decisions. So once you submit your paper to a journal, the editorial office will review your submission and decide whether they should send it out to the editor. If the submission has all the required elements, they will send it to the editor. The editor will then review the submission and decide whether to send it out to external reviewers. If they do send it out, they will choose 2 or more external experts to assess the paper and provide a report with a recommendation for a decision. The editor will then read through the reports and make a decision about the paper. Now, there are a few different decisions that can be made during the process, including rejection and acceptance. However, the most common decisions are DES reject and revise and resubmit. So DES rejections occur before the paper is sent out to external peer review. And these decisions usually are made by the editor, and in some cases by the editorial office. And they're usually made within 1 or 2 days after the submission. And one of the main reasons why they are rejected at this state is just because the article isn't a good fit for the journal. Now, revise and resubmit decisions are made after the paper has been peer reviewed. So these decisions are based on recommendations made by the peer reviewers, but it's always the editor's decision in the end. This decision means that the peer reviewers and editors are interested in your work, but they feel that there are areas that could be improved upon. So revise and resubmit with major revisions means that there is something in your paper that the editor and peer reviewers find interesting. It could be the data you're working with, your case study, the overall article, theoretical framework, could be any number of things. But you still likely will have quite a bit of work to do before it's accepted, and it's not guaranteed that your article will be accepted. Revise and resubmit with minor revisions, which is sometimes called conditional acceptance, means that there are some small changes that need to be made. Maybe additional citations, reformatting of a table, or something like that. Usually if you address these changes, your papers will be accepted. Now, once you've finished your revisions, you'll resubmit to the journal. The editor will look at the new version and will possibly send it back to the reviewers to see if they're happy with how you've addressed their concerns. They may ask you to make additional changes if they feel you didn't address the original concerns sufficiently. And this can happen a couple of times with you making revisions and the reviewers asking you to try again. Now, the bad news is this cycle can happen 2 to 3 times, and your paper can be rejected in the end if the editor feels that you were not able to address the peer reviewer's concerns sufficiently. But I'll tell you how to avoid that in just a moment. Responding to the reviewer's comments is an important part of the publishing process. And I have to say, at times when you receive the reviewer reports, it can feel like a rejection, especially with revise and resubmit with major revisions. Try not to become upset. And if you are upset, close your computer, go into the kitchen, make yourself a nice cup of tea, and forget about it for a couple of days. And when you're ready to get back to work, open up that computer and carefully read the decision letter from the editor. It may include advice on how to respond to the reviewer's comments, especially if they're suggesting kind of opposing things, and it will provide information about deadlines for returning your revisions. If you have co-authors, set up a meeting to review all of the reviewer's comments. Make certain to share the reports with everyone prior to your meeting. And whether you have co-authors or not, carefully go through the reviewer reports and make a list with all of their suggestions for improvement. You may want to group the comments based on categories. So for instance, literature review or methods, but you want to make sure to capture all the comments. So once you have every single recommendation for a change, you want to go through your list and decide which of those recommendations you'd like to adopt, and you want to make those changes in your paper. Now, here's the key to avoiding the fate of going through the revisions process a couple of times and still being rejected. When you send back your revisions, you must include a note to the editor clearly detailing how you've addressed the peer reviewer's concerns. Where you have adopted the peer reviewer's recommendations, clearly detail what you've changed and where that change can be located in the paper. So give the page and line number. You can maybe highlight some of the changes you've made, and some journals even allow the use of track changes to help the editors and peer reviewers see what you've done. But you still need that cover letter explaining what you've done. Now, you will not agree with all of the peer reviewers' recommendations. That's absolutely normal. But in those cases, you need to clearly and respectfully explain why you chose not to mend your paper. And again, be specific. So for instance, if the peer reviewer thought you should cite another paper, but you feel it's out of scope of your project, explain why that is so that both the peer reviewer and the editor understand your reasoning. Now, once you've detailed how you've addressed each of the peer reviewers' comments, review your response to the editor and make sure that you've included all of the recommendations and actions that you've taken, and that you've done so in a clear manner, and that the letter is professional and devoid of any frustration. Listen, this can be an incredibly challenging process, so it's understandable that you may become a bit frustrated at times. It's just really important that that doesn't influence your communication with the editor. And most importantly, remember to be respectful and professional during this process. This is your community, your future network. You may end up submitting to the journal again. You may be asked to peer review articles. You may want to become a board member one day, or you may have dreams of collaborating with the individuals who are currently reviewing your paper. So keep all of this in mind during the process. And remember, the editor and peer reviewers are just trying to help you publish the very best version of your work. Try not to take this process personally. It's about the research, not about you as an individual. Right, so now we've come to the end. And I just wanted to go over some of the top reasons for rejection. We've talked to our editors over the years and asked them what some of the main reasons they have for rejecting papers. And irrespective of the different subject areas, they tend to be similar. The number one reason, which I've mentioned already in the session today, is it was sent to the wrong journal. So again, remember to carefully do your research, read those aims and scope statements, look at what's been previously published in the journal before you submit. And number two is really understanding what sort of writing project you're undertaking and researching the best platform. So that comes back to that first slide that I was covering, taking the time to understand your objectives. Number three is about reading and following the instructions for authors, those author guidelines. It's the easiest thing to avoid because it's all clearly stated on the journal website. For 4 through 9, this is really about trying to get as much feedback as you can on your paper before you submit. So workshop your paper, have trusted colleagues read and comment, and find those colleagues that will give you tough critical feedback that is designed to help you improve your work. And do consider presenting your work at conferences if you can. And for number 10, avoid at all costs, obviously. And that is it for me. Thank you for for your humor with all the disruptions I've had. And I can stop sharing now and take questions in just a brief moment.
Thank you so much to you.
Hey. Thanks.
No worries. Thank you so much to you, Miss Victoria, for your very insightful sharing with us. Okay, we would like to open to the floor if you have any questions. And also, we are collecting questions in case the questions are posted on our social media platform. But we are giving the priority to those who attend our Microsoft team. If you have any questions, you may type in the chat box, or you may unmute yourself. Okay, Miss Victoria, there's a question from Chang Kai Ming. What is the standard for allocating credit and importance for author order? Is it that the last author is for the frontline supervisor, or for the head of the research team, or the least important member?
Yeah, this is a great question. We get it a lot. And unfortunately, there isn't a rule. It depends on the discipline. So for instance, in economics, they do it alphabetically, irrespective of the contribution the person made. If you have the last name starting with A, you will always be first author. But this really varies a lot between subject areas. And one initiative that was launched a few years ago, and we're all hoping really is adopted, is the credit initiative. And I don't know if you're aware of the credit initiative, but basically what it is advocating for is that authors will indicate what part of the process they were responsible for in that authorship line. So you'll see examples of that on our F1000 site, and certain journals will use the credit. But there is no universal rule for those authorship lines, so it's just really to follow what is common in your research area.
All right, we hope that Ms. Victoria's feedback is useful for you. We have collected a few questions from other platforms, if you don't mind, Ms. Victoria.
No,
okay.
Not at all.
Yeah, thank you. One question from the audience is, how can we select journals with fast review cycle? Because I believe that some of the researchers, they are postgraduate students when they have publication obligation. So how could we actually go about to choose journals with very fast review cycle? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I was just going to see if I can show this. Now, I think they're updating our website today. I think that's why I couldn't show you some of the functionality. But on Taylor and Francis' website, if you go under metrics, we have our publication times for each journal, so you can kind of compare journals. And as I showed you, even on the Web of Science, they were featuring that information in the DOAJ, time from submission to publication. Now, of course, the peer review process is a huge part of the calculus there. So if the peer review process takes long, if you're going through multiple rounds of peer review, that's obviously going to impact the timeline there. But the statistics that they'll have on those websites will be kind of the average of all articles, but it will differ, obviously.
Thank you very much. That would be very helpful. Tan Chi Wee, you are speaking.
Okay,
never mind. Hello, Tan Chi Wee, could you please unmute could you please mute yourself? Okay, thank you. All right, Miss Victoria, there's another question from our other social media platform. All right, this question, there are two parts. Okay, some researchers have perception that open for gold open access publication are less prestigious. What is your thought about this? And the second part of the question, why the cost of certain open access journals sometimes is too high?
Oh, those are great questions. Yeah, I think that open access publishing really suffered in the beginning with a lot of skepticism. A lot of people felt that those open access journals were not as good. And part of that really was because these predatory publishers were taking advantage of that open access model. So there were some open access journals that were indeed bad quality. But what's important to remember about open access is the editorial processes are exactly the same. So you're going to see variation with open access journals, just as you would see variation with subscription-based journals. Some journals are going to be higher quality. They might have, higher metrics or more prestigious authors, and some will have less. I won't say quality, but they might be less prestigious. So the same rules apply to open access as apply to any other journal. They still need to follow the same editorial policies, etc. Now, in terms of APCs, there is huge variation in APCs, and some journals are incredibly expensive. I will agree. And there might be many reasons for that. So it could have to do with the historical model that the journal had. So maybe it was a subscription-based journal, and it was a very prestigious journal. It was getting a lot of submissions, so they felt that they could charge a higher APC because each journal is its own economy, if you will. So some journals have a lot of costs. They have editors that they need to pay and this sort of thing. So they need to cover those costs. Whereas other journals might have kind of an lower operating level where they don't need to charge as much. Some journals are funded by societies or by institutions. We have a number of journals that are funded, and so the APC costs are very low, or we might not have any APC costs. So there can be a lot of different reasons why you see that variation in cost. But a lot of them, as I say, will kind of have a history behind it. So you see a lot of the kind of nature journals and stuff came in with very high APC costs, but they also have really high expenses for all the editors and people that are on staff. So that's where you're going to see some variation there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Victoria, for the feedback. There's one more question from Kwek Chi Ying. Normally, how long it takes from the stage of review by reviewers till the stage of editor assessment of reviews or decision? Thank you.
Yeah, I get this question a lot. And I always stress that this is a human process, and you're all researchers, so you'll know how busy you get. And you get these requests to review and you want to contribute and you say, yeah, I'll review that paper, and you have the best intention. And then suddenly your plate becomes very full and you can't find that Sunday afternoon to read and review the paper. So we really encourage the journals we work with to try and get that first decision to the authors within 3 months. And I know for some of you that maybe are in kind of more STM, that sounds like a long time, but we have a lot of social science journals. So that's why we say 3 months, because peer review in social science tends to take a little bit longer just because it's text heavy. So the things that can get in the way of that 3 months are that people are busy, that it's difficult to find peer reviewers. Editors are chasing peer reviewers for the reports and this sort of thing. Global pandemics can get in the way. So during COVID, we saw huge delays in peer review. So there can be a number of factors that get in the way. But what I'll say to you is if you've submitted an article and it's currently under peer review and you haven't heard back, there's been no communication after, say, 4.5 months, it's perfectly fine to write a polite note to the editor just saying, would it be possible to get an update? I haven't heard anything. Again, just something very short and polite, because sometimes editors appreciate that. It allows them to go back to the peer reviewers and saying, hey, I've heard back from the author. What's the status on the paper? So again, this is a community. It's perfectly fine to feedback and ask questions, but I would give them, about 4 months to try and get that first review out.
All right. Thank you. Is it okay for us to pick a little bit more question?
Of course, yeah.
Thank you. There's a question from Khairul Abdulkadir. What's your opinion on ceramide slicing? Please correct me if I'm
Salami
pronouncing it
slicing.
correctly.
Yeah. I usually cover that, but we had so much to cover today that I had to cut some things. So yes, salami slicing is a huge problem, and it's an understandable problem because everyone's under so much pressure to publish more and more articles. And if you're always publishing, you don't have time to do research, do you? So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the term salami slicing, basically what it is, it's when you have a research project that, say, should have produced maybe 2 articles, but you know that you need to publish 4 articles in a 2-year period. So you try and squeeze 4 articles out of one research project. It's likely the 3rd and 4th article aren't introducing anything new into the literature. It's just kind of reworking what you've already published in a different way. And it's what we call salami slicing, taking a little bit of data and slicing it up to try and get as many articles as you can. And it's definitely frowned upon. If an article is basically rewriting what's already been published, it really tends to be more of a duplicate publication. It isn't anything new. So we definitely discourage it. Editors are on the lookout for it. It's likely that the article will be rejected. We're seeing a lot of cases now, if you're looking at Retraction Watch and things like that, of, well-established researchers having a lot of their articles retracted because over time people were able to see that this was a case of salami slicing, taking a very small data set and publishing 5 articles out of it. So, yeah, I would avoid salami slicing at all costs. You know when you're done telling your story. You know when the story is done. And when you're done telling the story, it's time to move on to another project. And if right now you don't have new data or new research project, there are other types of publications you can pursue. Review articles, things like this. It's not that the publication always has to be based on a data set or a research project. It can also be based on other data that's out there, or, as I say, review articles or different types of publications.
Right, thank you. I believe this is one last question from Chang Kai Ming. As a journal editor, is it necessary that the review board only be staffed by associate professors and above? It is very hard to find the manpower for such high qualifications, as most staff reviewers do not have the high posting. Seeking for your
right. Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So you're talking about a journal that has a review board that is doing all the reviewing for the journal? Is that the case? Yeah.
Yes, this is correct.
Yeah. So some journals use that model. So they'll have kind of like a college of reviewers or whatever the case is. And I agree, it can be really difficult to find those people that maybe have the established academics to sit on that board. And what I would encourage you to think about is those early career researchers that are very close to the research and are making a name for themselves, so you obviously want someone with a lot of publishing experience, but I think a lot of times when people are looking to create those boards, they're looking at the top names in their field, the really established researchers, and I would encourage you to look at those early career researchers. The other thing is you might want to consider how you're running peer review in the journal. If it's hard to create that board of reviewers that is going to sit there and take responsibility for all the peer review, you might think about having a smaller board, diversifying that board. I don't know what the subject area is, but if it is a large subject area, you could have that board of reviewers, and you could have one person focusing on different area within your discipline, and then you could have a combination of the reviewer board and external peer reviewers, so that person is helping to find external peer reviewers as well. So that takes the weight off of trying to find all those people that have a full-time commitment to doing the peer review. I hope that helps, if I'm understanding the situation correctly.
All right, thank you so much to Ms. Victoria. I believe there are no more questions coming up. But some of the participants are actually asking whether would it be okay for Miss Victoria to share the PowerPoints?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Miss Victoria, for being so generous. Then we'll be getting in contact with Taylor and Francis office. Then we'll see how to disseminate that to our participants.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll send that later today.
Thank you so much. So I think no more questions are coming up. So I think it's good for us to wrap up the session. So once again, from DIFCON 2024, it is our great pleasure to have you today with us. And definitely from all of us, either we are new researchers or experienced researchers, definitely we have been very much benefited from your talk today. So once again, thank you. And we wish you to have a very, very good day. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks for your understanding with my disruptions today.
No worries. No worries. Thank you very much.
Great. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.